Hey guys, BrandonioProductions here, and welcome to the 8th part of making Snake in Java tutorials. Yes. In the past parts, we've successfully made an entire Snake application that works perfectly. The mechanics are perfect. There are just a few things that we need to add, and one of which is actually the high score. So in the previous tutorial, we addressed all of the issues with double buffering, and I wanted to actually put the high score in that tutorial, but I ended up running out of time. So in this part, we're going to adjust actually creating the high score. So the idea of a high score, if you didn't know, is when you actually start up the game, right under the current score, there should be displayed a high score, which is the current high score. And if you beat that score, your high score gets saved. Now, there are a few things that we can actually do with the score, such as attach a name to it and other things. What we're going to do is, if your score is greater than the current high score, we're going to ask for your name, and then we're going to save that high score to a file. On the program's startup, the high score file is going to be opened, and then the high score will be displayed. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. The first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to make a new variable called high score. And we're going to make the high score equal to -1 to begin. Now, the reason we make it equal to -1 is what we want to do is we actually want to read right from the file where the high score is saved, and if there is no high score inside of the file, well, then we're just going to set the high score equal to 0. So the -1 is just a checking to see to tell the program that we haven't necessarily set a high score. Now, the next thing we need to do is actually get the high score. So inside of our paint method, this is where we're actually starting everything. And so we say if snake equals null, then we initialize the snake. If the run thread equals null, then we initialize the run thread. So we're just going to tag another one on here. If score equals -1. So this is why we did the -1. So if, or not score rather, but high score. So if high score equals -1, then we need to initialize the high score. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and scroll all the way down to the bottom of our application, and we're going to create a new method called public int get high score. So why is this a public int? Well, what we're going to do in the get high score method is we're going to read a file and then return the integer value of the high score within the file. So we're going to say get high score value, and actually we're going to make this a private string get high score, because what we're going to do is we're going to get the high score and the name that's attached to it. So how it's going to work is we're going to have it's sort of like this. So let's say the high score is 100. We're going to have the user's name, a colon, and then their high score. So let's go ahead and get right into the file reading. Now, if you actually haven't if you haven't checked out my tutorial on how to actually read from a file, you can do that. I believe it's in my Java tutorials part 15. But that knowledge will definitely help you here, because we're going to be using basically the same exact style here. So what we're going to do is in the get high score, we're going to say first create a file reader to actually read from the file. So we're going to say file reader read file. We're just going to call it read file, and then we're going to set that equal to a new file reader. And what we need to do here is we actually need to pop in a path. So this path is simply going to be highscore.dat. So what does this mean? Since we haven't actually put any slashes or any like true parent directories in this, we're simply going to be getting a high score file that is in the same directory as our class. And why do we use .dat? Well, .dat means data, so we're just going to use a data file. We could use .txt, but .dat makes it trickier because users won't be able to directly edit the txt file to change the high score. So we're just going to go ahead and import the file reader, and then we're going to continue with our next step. Now let's go ahead and check out why this is throwing. Oh yes, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to add a throws declaration, because if the file is not found, actually we're not going to do that. We're going to say try here. And so the main problem here is if we encounter an error, then the file is most likely not found. So we're just going to say if there's an error, then we're going to return 0 as the high score. So what does this mean? Well, if there's an error, for example, it can't read the file or the file doesn't exist, our high score is going to be 0 with no name. So that's nothing bad at all. So now that we've actually created the file reader, we can go ahead and begin reading the file. Now, the file reader is only supposed to be 1 line long. So all we need to do is we need to return read file dot read line. Wait. No, we don't. What am I doing? Okay, so we have a read file right now, but what we need to do is we actually need to work in conjunction with a buffered reader. Now, a buffered reader is just like a buffered writer. All it does is read streams from the system. So we're going to read the stream from our read file. So first, we're going to create a new buffered reader. We're going to say buffered reader. We're going to call it file reader equals, wait, that's confusing. Buffered reader equals new buffered reader. And all we need to do is in the parameters, we just need to send in a file reader. So we're just going to send in read file. And now all we need to do is we need to actually return return the reader.readLine. So all this does is read the first line of the program and it actually returns it. Now we're just going to import buffered reader. Now, one of the actual problems with this, yes, it's throwing an error, is the reader is never closed. So what we need to do is we actually need to say reader.close. Well, as you can see here, we have it as soon as we create the reader and read the line, we return, which means the method is going to be exited. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add a finally block to our application. A finally block is something that is executed right after a try block finishes. And what we want to do in our finally block is we actually want to close the reader. But if we try to simply type in reader.close, you can see that it's going to throw us an error because reader doesn't exist within this block. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to create the file reader and the buffered reader outside of the try block. So we're just going to say file reader read file equals null and buffered reader equals null. And then inside of the try block, instead of actually declaring what they are, we're just going to simply set the new values to the new items. And then in the finally block, reader.close is going to work. Now it actually wants us to surround this with another try catch. So why not, right? We can have as many try catches as we want, I suppose. Okay, so now our get high score method is going to work, and it's going to return a high score in the format of the user's name, colon, and their high score. Now, since we actually changed the format of the high score, we're actually going to want to change the value of high score to a string. So we're going to say private string high score, and we're going to set that equal to a blank string to begin with. So then we want to say if high score dot equals a blank string, then we need to initiate the high score. And I forgot to capitalize this S. Whoops. So we need to initialize the high score. So what we did here in our get high score method is we simply made a read file that corresponded with an actual file in the system, a buffered reader to actually extract what we need from that file, and then we initialized the two, and we actually just return the first line of the file, which should contain our high score information. If there's any error within this, we simply return 0. So all we need to do now is when we initialize the high score, where is it? It should be near the top. Here it is. So when we initialize the high score, all we need to do is say high score equals this dot get high score. So that's going to go ahead and read from the file and actually set everything up. Now the next thing we need to do is we actually need to draw the high score onto the screen. Now we actually have a draw score method already set up, which draws the current score, so we could just tag the high score right onto the draw score method. So we're going to go ahead and jump right to that method, and then we can go ahead and just say g.drawString high score, and we're going to put a colon, and then we're just going to say say plus, and then our high score variable. Now we need to set up a position for it, so we're going to set it at the x position of 0, and then we're going to set it right below the score. And as you can see, the score, the actual score, is drawn at box height times grid height plus 10. So we're going to do box height times grid height plus 17. So that's giving around 7 pixels of space between the score and the high score. So that should be definitely enough. So now our high score is drawn onto the screen. So now the final thing that we actually need to do is get the high score if the user is higher than the high score. I know that sounds kind of confusing, but if we go ahead and run the application now, we're just going to test everything so far. And as you can see, we get a bunch of errors thrown, which is definitely not what we had planned. And what we have is a null pointer exception. So what we have here is that the reader is actually null when we try to close it. Which, you know, that isn't... which can be prevented because all we're doing is we're trying to actually read the file from a file that doesn't exist. So this error is actually occurred because the file doesn't exist. And then we're trying to close the reader, but it's just not happening because the file doesn't exist. So inside of this try block, we're just going to say if reader is not equal to null, then we're going to go ahead and close it. So that should prevent any errors that we have. And as you can see, it does. So in our application, everything still works as planned, and we have a score and a high score. As you can see, the high score is 0, and as you can also see, the high score kind of collides with the score variable. So we're just going to go ahead and fix that position in our draw score method. We're going to go ahead and change the plus 17 to plus 20, and then we're going to run the application. And as you can see, that gives it definitely enough space. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually save the high score when the user loses. So where do we check to see if the user loses? Well, that is in our move method. So as you can see here, every time we say we went out of bounds, reset game, what we need to do is we need to compare the high score to the score and see if we need to save it. So we can create a whole new method, public void check score, that does all of this for us. So the first thing check score is going to do is it's going to see if our score is greater than the high score. So if score is greater than high score, well, this means that the user has set a new record. So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually get the user's name. So we're going to say string name, and then we're just going to pop up with a J option pane. So we're going to say J option pane dot show input dialog, and the message is going to be you set a new high score. What is your name? That's good. So we're going to get the user's name from a J option pane, and now we can go ahead and actually save the file. So now that we have the name and we have the user's score, and this is throwing an error. Oh, so why this is throwing an error is because the score is an integer and the high score is actually a string. But if you remember, the format we set it up in is the user's name, colon, and then their score. So what we need to do is we need to actually extract this score. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to split this string into two different strings, depending on where the colon is. So we're going to say a high score dot split, and then we're going to split it by the colon. And then what we need to do is we actually need to get the second part of this. So what this does is it splits it into an array of two parts. One that contains the name and one contains the number. So we're just going to get the second part by signaling that we want the first slot in the array, because remember that the second slot, or the first slot rather, is 0 and the second slot is 1. Then we're just going to cast this to an integer by putting int around it, or next to it, and then putting this in parentheses as well. And this should do the trick, however, it may not. Goodness. Maybe we need to do... Oh, no. What we need to do instead is we need to do the integer.parseInt. And then we can send in a string. And what the integer.parseInt command does is it turns a string into an integer. So I believe that this should work properly. We're splitting it by the colon, getting the second part, and parsing it into an integer. So if the score is greater than the high score, then we're getting the name, and then we can go ahead and save the high score. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set the new high score variable. So we want to say high score equals name plus colon plus their score, which is simply score. So this makes it so if the user were to keep on playing, the high score variable would be correct. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to save the file. So this can be done using basically the same method, except instead of using a file reader and a file writer, or a file reader and a buffered reader, we're going to use a file writer and a buff writer. So what we want to do first is we want to make sure that the score file actually exists. So we're going to go ahead and put and create a file variable rather. So we're going to say file score file, and we're going to set it equal to a new file, and the path is going to be highscore.dat because that's where our high score is being saved. Now, as you can see, we also need to import the file type, so we're going to do that. And then once we're going to do that, we can go ahead and see if the score file already exists. So we're going to say if score file.exists. Well, then we don't need to do anything. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to put an exclamation point on the front of this, which simply says if the score file doesn't exist, then we want to say score file.create new file. Now this is actually going to want to get a try catch surrounded by it. So we're just going to put that into a try catch. Now the reason all of these need try catches is because an error could occur, and it doesn't want Java to go crazy if this were to be the case. So if the score file doesn't exist, then we're just going to go ahead and create the new file by popping in the try catch block there. And so at this point in the code, the file should be created. So we can go ahead and write to it. So just like what we did before, we're going to say file writer, we're just going to call this write file, equal to null, and then we're going to say buffered writer, writer equals null, and then we're going to start a try catch block once again. So in our try block, what we're going to do is we're simply going to do the same thing we did while reading. First thing we need to do is initialize the file writer. So we're going to say write file equals new file writer. And then we're going to send in a, now we can either send in a path or we can send in an actual file. So what we're actually going to end up doing is, since we already have this file variable created, score file, we can just go ahead and send in score file. Because why not, right? Now the next thing we actually need to end up doing is make an instance of our buffered writer. So we're going to say writer equals new buffered writer. And then we want to send in the file writer. So we're going to send in write file. So now all we need to do is we actually just need to write to the file. So all we need to do now is we're just going to say writer dot write. Oops. Don't know why I'm pressing arrow keys so often. We're going to say writer dot write, and we're just going to go ahead and write our name and then the high score. So we're going to say name. Actually, we already have this stored in the variable high score. So we're just going to write this dot high score. Now it actually throws an error with file writer because we forgot to import that. And now that we've actually wrote the high score to the file, we can go ahead and close the file writer. So the first thing we need to do is we need to catch any exceptions that may occur. Now these are going to errors just in case the file is not found, but we don't really want to do anything with that. And then we're going to make another finally block. This finally block is of course going to close the writer. So we're going to say if writer is not equal to null, then we want a writer.close. And as we know from our previous experience, we also need to put this in a try catch block. Now we can just make the curly braces on the same line to save space. And we forgot the open close parentheses. And now we're all good. So now we have a method that actually writes the high score to a file. So let's go over this one more time. So basically what we're doing is we're creating a file writer which will actually, it stores the file to write to. And then we're creating a buffered writer which actually allows us to write to the file. Here we're saying that the write file equals a new file writer, and we're sending in the score file, which is our previously created file. Now we use this file variable simply to check to see if the file exists, and if it doesn't, we're going to create it. Now, sorry, excuse me. Now after we create the buffered writer, we send in the write file, which is the variable that pretty much turns a file into a writable file. And then we simply use our buffered writer to write the high score into the file. And then the buffered writer needs to be closed, otherwise we get that nasty Windows error or any other operating system error where we try to delete a file and it says the file's in use. Well, our program will constantly be using the file if we don't close the writer. So we do that here. Now my only concern about this is here we write to the file, but we never actually clear the file. So I'm going to see if there's actually a way to clear the file. So we're going to say writer dot. Now is there any way let's go ahead and check out the write method and see what that does. Now it looks like since there's a difference between write and append, no, wait. No, I don't. I think that the write method will actually. I don't know. I don't know if it will overwrite the data that we already have. So since I don't know, what I'm going to do is I can actually just delete the score file, and then we can recreate. No, that's not good. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and test out this high score first of all. So let's go ahead and open up the Explorer and navigate to where our file is actually going to be stored. So mine's in Java Workspace 2 Snake tutorial, and then bin. This is where my high score will be stored, so we can go ahead and check out the behavior here. So if we run the application, and our high score is currently 0, so we're just going to go ahead and beat the high score by picking up 1 dot, and then we're going to run into the wall here. As you can see, nothing actually happens, and that's because we were silly. And we created the check score method, but we actually didn't put the check score method anywhere. So where it says we went out of bounds, reset game, we just need to pop in check score into these places. So we're going to pop check score into there, check score into there, check score into here. And those are the only 3 things that will actually make us die. So let's go ahead and run the application once again. And we actually get an error here of the array index is out of bounds, because the check score method, it's not really working if the user has 0 points. So we're going to make it so the check score method doesn't work if the current score, or if the high score doesn't see. What the problem is right now is the high score doesn't contain a user. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it so the high score is or the check score method does not work if the high score is simply 0. Or rather, no. What we're going to do is we're going to actually make the default high score variable have a user to it. So we're going to make it so the current high score, or when the high score is actually 0, the high score is created by nobody. So that should solve our error. As you can see, it doesn't. Don't really know why it doesn't. So as you can see here, the error is caused by the 1 here is actually out of bounds. So the high score does not contain a colon. So what we're going to do is we're actually, as soon as the check score method is called, we're going to say system.out.println, and then we're going to print out the high score, just to see what the variable is actually looking like. And then we're going to run the application. And as you can see, the check score method is actually constantly being called. Well, actually it was. The check score method is called constantly when you're actually starting the game. But now we're going to go ahead, and now you can see that the high score is nobody : 0. So if we actually end the game there, here we are. So it pops up with an input saying that we set a new high score. What is your name? Well, my name is going to be Brandon, and then I'm going to press OK. And as you can see, the high score is now set to Brandon : 20. And now since the high score is set to Brandon : 20, we can go ahead and just end the program to see the behavior. Well, actually, we don't even have to end it. Whoops. So we can go ahead and check out our Snake tutorial directory here, and as you can see, there is a highscore.dat file. So we're going to go ahead and right click it and press edit with Notepad++, and I'm going to drag it over to this screen, and as you can see, it currently is Brandon 20. Now let's go ahead and create a new high score. So we're going to go and crash into this dot, crash into this dot, crash into this dot, and if we set a new high score, we're going to now make our name Bob. So our name is Bob, we press OK, and as you can see, the high score is now Bob : 30. And if we actually refresh the text file here, you can see that the whole thing is replaced with Bob : 30. So the .write method actually clears everything within the text file. So as you can see here, there's a tiny bug where if we're actually starting the game, our score is constantly being retrieved, which is kind of weird. But I think it's because we are currently actually crashing into a wall. I don't know why it's doing that, but it does not matter. We are out of time. We are actually long out of time. I made this video a little too long, but as you can see, now we have a working high score. Now, I know this video is a little weird, but hey. So now if we, for example, we get a score of 50, or 60, or 70, you can see that we can type in our name again. My name is going to be Brandon. I'm going to reclaim my former glory of having a high score. I'm going to press OK, and as you can see, the high score is now Brandon70. Now, if we were to actually close this program and reopen it, you can see that we actually get the index out of bounds exception again, which is seriously causing some problems, and that is because the high score variable is blank. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if high score is dot equals nothing, then we're simply going to return. Now this simply exits out of the method. So if the high score is nothing, then there's no need to check the score because the high score hasn't even been initialized yet. So now if we go ahead and run the snake applet, you can see that it has not the, what am I talking about? Oh, an error has not occurred, and the high score has been properly initialized and loaded from a file. So this is how to save high scores, so now you can compete with your friends or anything of that matter. Alright, well, thank you for watching this tutorial, and we will cover more information regarding this snake game in further tutorials, so keep an eye out for that, and thanks for watching. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe, and have a fantastic day. Peace. Oh, curses. Where's the video stop button? There it is.